exactly called for. Aggregate production planning is one of the method or one of the process for the operation management. It refers to determine the production, the inventory, and the personal levels to fulfill the demand over a planning schedules or perspective that actually ranges a period of 6 months to 1 year. It's mainly focused on the product families rather than the individual products, and it's mainly include all those factors which ultimately useful for the planning schedule, like the production rate, workforce level, and the inventory holdings. This concept is always serves as a bridge between the company long-term strategic goals and its detailed short-term production schedules. What was the purpose of the aggregate production planning? The one of the main purpose of aggregate production planning is to minimize the cost. The one of the foremost goal of the APP is to find out the lowest cost plan by balancing the various cost. It could be the labor cost, overtime cost, inventory cost, or any other cost involved in the planning process. The next purpose is to meet up the demand. It always ensures that sufficient supply has to meet the customer demands during the planning process or the planning period, which involves 6 months to 1 year. The next purpose is to optimize the resources. This particular concept has to balance between the production capacity with the demand in order to ensure that the efficient use of the labor and equipment and raw materials would be equipped well. The next one is the support employees. It always aims to provide a stable work schedule which can lead an increased employee satisfaction and its productivity. And the last one is to ensure the customer satisfaction. It aims to streamline all those processes and ensure the adequate supply should meet up the demand. That means the company should meet the customer's expectations and the satisfactions more consistently. The next section is the approaches or strategies of aggregate production planning. There are 3 main strategies. The first one is the level strategy, second one is a chess strategy, and the third one is a hybrid strategy. So the first level of strategy of the APP, as its the name suggests, the level strategy aims to maintain the smooth production rate and the workforce level. It means whatever the organization requires, it should require to forecast the demand to increase or decrease the production so that they can meet up the lower or the higher customer demand. So this level of strategies mainly aims to forecast the demand according to the increase and decrease in demand in order to low or higher customer demand to meet up. The main advantage of this strategy is a steady workforce, and one of the main disadvantage of this strategy is a higher inventory rate and it also increases the backlogs of the, you can say, processes. The next one is a chess strategy. As the name suggests, this type of strategy looks dynamically it should match the demand with the production. The main advantage of this strategy is a lower inventory levels and the backlogs as compared to the level strategy, and one of the main disadvantage of this strategy is the lower productivity, quality, and the depressed workforce. And when any organization, when there is a depressed workforce, then of course it leads to a lower productivity and of course the quality as well. So the main aim of this strategy is just is to equalize the demand and production. And that is the main reason the few advantages and disadvantages is always come up with this strategy. So if you look up the diagrammatic representation of the level strategy and the CHAS strategy, the level strategy where the organization aims to forecast the demand with the increase and decrease of the production in order to meet up the customer demand and satisfaction. As you can see in the diagram, it's a split pitfall and increases at a decreasing rate, same as the production decreases, the demand is also decreases, and so on. And that's called the level strategy. But as in case of the CHAS strategy, it always try to match the demand with the production. So if the production is decreases at the let's say by 10%, that the demand should also be decreased by the 10% only, and that is the main strategy of the CHAS level, that if that demand should be equal or should be matched with the production. So if you look up the diagrammatic representation, so if the demand, if the production, you can say, decreases by 10%, the demand should be decreases by 10%. If this scenario, you can say, occurs, then ultimately it's called the CHAS strategy. So these are the pure strategy for meet up the demand, so that it could order to satisfy the demand of the customers and satisfaction level. And the next strategy is a hybrid strategy. As the name suggests, is a combination of both the strategy, that is the level strategy, and the CHAS strategy. So it also aims to make a balance between these two types of strategies. And when any of the organization aims to balance or to apply these both strategies, that ultimately it's called the hybrid strategy. Now we can come up to the next most important part of the section, that is the techniques of aggregate production planning. There are two main techniques which follows by the organization, and one of the more realistic technique, that is the informal trial and error techniques, and the mathematical techniques are the rare techniques which could be adopted by the organization in the research purposes. So let's begin with the overview of these two techniques. So the first one is the informal trial and error techniques. So this method or this technique it aims to develop the plan, the calculation of the cost, and then repeat the process which has been decided by the organization by following a different strategies until a satisfactory low cost plan is found. So the ultimate aim of this strategy is to figure out a low cost plan, and accordingly whatever the process has to be followed, that could be done to gain or to achieve the low cost plan. The main steps are to follow in this particular technique, that the first one is to forecast the demand for each period. If we're talking about the 3 months period, so an organization will need to forecast the demand for the January, February and March. The next step is to determine the capacity options. The capacity option would be a regular time the processes goes on, the regular time of the production planning goes on, or it could be the overtime of the employees, or it could be the subcontracting of the workforce or the work, and that would be the second step of the informal trial and error technique. The next step is to identify the relevant, you can say, company policies, whether the stable policy would be useful for preparing, you can say, the aggregate production plan, or the you can say the inventory levels could be the low one to apply for the production plan, or the you can say aggregate production plan. So this is how we need to identify the relevant capacity. It could be the workforce, or it could be the inventory, it could be the technology, it could be any other or enterprises or technologies could be adopted or used to find out the most appropriate capacity company policies which involved in it. Next is to determine the cost associated with each resources. And the resources could be the holding stock, it could be the overtime, it could be the back orders or backlogs of stock. So this is something which is quite very challenging and important to determine the cost which could be associated with each resources. Either could be stock, either could be the overtime of the workforce, either could be the back orders of the you can say product or the items. So once we follow the first four steps, then we can come up to the last step, that's to create an alternative plan or adopt the most appropriate strategy. It could be the level strategy, where to forecast the demand according to the increase and decrease in the production in order to fulfill the customer demand. That is called the level strategy. Or on other hand, the company can choose the charge strategy, where they need to equalize or match the demand with the production, or just maintain a balance between these two main variables. So that could be the charge strategy. So once we forecast, determine the capacity options, look up the company policies, and just determine the cost, then we come up to the choosing up the level of the strategies or the approaches the company could choose for. Why the strategy is to be adopted? Because the main purpose of the company is to find out the low cost plan for the planning process, for the production planning processes. Next is, once we choose the best strategy or the most appropriate strategy for the, you can say, aggregate production plans, then the next step is to use a table, a spreadsheet table, to track the production, the inventory, the back orders for each period, and accordingly calculate the total cost for the plan. Because ultimately we need to find out the low cost plan. So the next step is using the spreadsheets tables to track the production, inventory, and back orders for every month, for every period, and then accordingly calculate the total cost for the plan. And then once we estimated the total cost of the plan, then repeat with the different plan. If we we get the one plan, then again repeat the process and come up with a different plan, and then compare both the plans and the cost, and then select the best strategy. So this is how the informal trial and error technique is to be followed to come up with the best appropriate you can say aggregate plan process, and with the use of the best strategy while comparing the cost among the different periods. The next technique is a mathematical techniques. The main purpose of this technique is to compare the plans and extensively studied in research. So mathematical techniques are basically classified into two main techniques, that is the linear programming and the simulation models. A mathematical modeling technique is mainly used to find out the best outcome in a mathematical model where the requirements are represented by a linear relationships. And simulation, you can say model, this model is mainly to represent a complex system, and which are to be used to evaluate the effects of different, you can say, decisions, and ultimately used to predict the outcome of the aggregate plans under uncertainties. So that is the main reason to adopt the simulation models. If there any complex situation, if there any difficult situation which could not be you can say use up any strategy, then we can use up the mathematical techniques that's called the simulation models. So these techniques are less common in the daily practice, and these techniques are mainly useful in the researchers. The one of the benefit of these techniques provide a rigorous objective way to compare the costs of different plans, and that can be used in the complex problems, and you can say with the use of many variables. So when any mathematical equation is required to is required to construct, and while comparing the cost of the different plans, then this mathematical techniques will be used by the organization for the research purposes. Now we can come up to the advantages and disadvantages of two main strategies. The first one is the level output strategy, and the second one is CHAS output strategy. Level output strategy is always lower the hiring cost, layoff cost, or the workforce cost, and the training cost as well. It always retain that skilled employees should be in the organization. The one of a few advantages of the CHAS output strategy, there is no need to look on the backlogs, and that's the main reason it leads to a low cost of carrying inventory. It could be impossible to build up the stock of most of the services. The few disadvantages of both strategies. So the first one is it is very costly, and it also involves the costly inventories and the backlogs, or the refuse the orders in sometimes. But in case of the CHAS output strategy, it incurs a very high cost of hiring and the layoff, and it also involves the high training cost as well. It also there is a situation exists in this strategy. It could be the loss of the skilled employees quality, and of course faces a productivity problems. So when we talk about the level output strategy, where we are talking about, or we are discussing about the lower hiring training cost and retain the skilled employees, whereas in the disadvantages of the CHAS output strategy, it could be the reverse case. It would be the hiring training cost, hiring cost, and of course the loss of skilled employees would be there. Now we can come up to the next section, that are the costs relevant to the aggregate production planning. There are three main costs which are very relevant to this particular concept. The first one is the basic production cost. It includes the material cost, direct labor cost, overhead cost, and it is also aims to divide these costs into the variable and the fixed cost, that ultimately called as segregations of the cost into the variable and the fixed cost. The next cost is the cost associated with the changes in the production rate. It also includes the costs involved in the hiring, workforce, training, laying off personnel, as well as the overtime compensation too. The next one is the inventory related cost. It also incurs the aggregate production process models, which may be supportive or which could be termed as a decision support systems, and of course being used to precise the proposals in the union negotiation if something situations comes in a way like strike or the union strike, etc. Now we can come up to the next part, that is the inputs and the outputs of the aggregate production planning. So when we in the common sense, the aggregate production planning is a medium term scheduling which incurs 6 to 18 months in advance. It's just an attempt to balance the capacity and the demand opportunities in such a way that the cost could be minimized, because the ultimate aim is to find out the low cost plan in the production process, and that's why it is equally important to maintain a balance between the capacity and the demand opportunities so that the cost could be minimized. So figure 1 is also explains the inputs required to create an aggregate plan, and also it also reveals the output which results from the plan. So let's have a overview of inputs and outputs. So these are the inputs and outputs of which come up from the aggregate production plan. It could be the capacity constraint or strategic objectives, capacity policies. We can talk about the demand opportunities, aggregate, you can say technical complexities, or we can also talk about any other inputs and the outputs which come up from the aggregate production planning. So let's have an overview with the main constraints, that would be the capacity and the demand. So let's talk about the demand and capacity factors. So aggregate planning is very significant to the supply chain process, and it includes both inputs from both demand and capacity, which influencing the factors, and the demand, which is defined as a total units needed to complete a production process, whereas the capacity is expressed as a total number of units per time period that could be produced. So there are various demand options are presented in order to meet capacity. The first one is pricing. So it is also the most commonly factor which is used to shift from peak periods of time to off peak periods. Let's take an example to understand. So airline companies will lowers the prices during the slower months of the year, and it increases the prices due to a peak period. So this is how the pricing factor or the price of the certain variable has to be decided according to the seasons. Next one is the promotion. Marketing efforts such as the keyword advertising, any events, any promotion, any direct email is also shift demand, so it matters the capacity. Next one is back ordering, postponing you can say orders to another period in order to smooth out the demand. Both goods and services can be back ordered in this particular process, and the success depends on the customer's expectation and how the long they are willing to wait. Next is complementary products that creates new demand. There are also products which are complementary to each other, or it may be the services. So during the peak seasons, demand can be increased that the complementary products or services are established. Let's take an example: a video arcade within a movie theater and a service bar within a restaurant while one wait for the table to be ready. So this is how the requirements and needs sustains, so that the complementary goods will also create a new demand for the customers. Now we can come up to the following capacity options which are presented to meet demand. The first one is the hiring and the laying of workers. So firms can also create a balance between the capacity and the demand, because ultimately here we are talking about the input and output from the aggregate planning, production planning. So automatically the capacity options are also available, and the one of the option is hiring and laying off workers, where the main purpose is to create the balance of capacity and the demand by adjusting their workforce. This option is also available where there is a shortage of workforce, but unfortunately it also incurs the expensive cost associated with the training, with the services, with the pay scale, with the moral and the quality suffering. The next one is the overtime. Firm can also increase the capacity by asking the workers whether they could work overtime or not. So it could be a better option rather than hiring a new employees in the organization, and somehow the overtime can also result in lower productivity, accident, or the increased idle time as well. So overtime, it could be a better option, but it could not be a better option due to the such results, rather such results like lower productivity, accidents, or the increased idle time. The next one is the part-time and the temporary workers. The organization can also choose an option to increase their capacity to meet up the demand, because these workers do not receive the same financial benefits. The next one is subcontracting. Business can also choose an option to adjust and maintain the balance in another manufacturers or the service provider in order to provide the product or service to the subcontractor firm's customers. So by subcontracting the work to another source, additional capacity is temporarily found in any way. Now we can come up with the most important part, that's called an aggregate production planning process. The first one is to forecast the demand. So gather all the historical demand data so that it could identify the trends involved in it, and also project the future demand for the planning period. It could be 6 to 18 months. The next step is to assess the resources and the cost. It also determines the company current productivity capacity or the production capacity, workforce size, and the inventory levels. It also identify the corporate policy or the external constraints such as the overtime limits, inventory targets, or any other you can say company rules related to the union negotiations. Then the next is to gather detailed cost information for you can say a regular time production. Then to find out or to identify the overtime or the subcontracting options, or the holding inventory or the back orders if needed or if allowed to involve in this particular you can say production process. The next step is to develop the alternative plans. Create a different scenarios to meet up the forecast demand, and each plan will likely use the different combination of the strategies, and the strategies could be the regular time production, it could be the overtime, it could be inventory, subcontracting, hiring and layoff, and back ordering. So when the each plan to be you can say workouts to be on working. So accordingly the organization choose the different combination of strategies like regular time production, that means to maintain a steady workforce in the planning process. Over time, it means it increase the production output by having employees work more hours. Inventory build up a stock during the low demand periods to meet the future demand. Subcontracting is outsourcing, just taking up this you can say outsource you can say the other subcontractor farms to meet up the demands and just production to the other companies. Hiring and layoff it just to adjust the size of the workforce, and the back ordering just delaying the customer's orders when demand exceeds supply. The next step is to evaluate and select a plan. Calculate the total cost for the each alternative plan which has been decided for the various strategies like overtime, production, process, etc. by summing up the cost of all the periods. So once we choose up the each alternative plans or whatever the plans we have, the organization has been decided, the next step is to calculate the cost for all those periods, then compare the plans against each other based on the total cost, and just look up at how well they align with the corporate policies or objectives. It could be the customer services or the resource utilization. And once the organization compared the plans according to the cost and whether such plan is aligned with the objective, then at last the organization select the plan that best meets the company objectives or aims. Next step or the last step is to implement and monitor the plan. So put the chosen plan into the action, and like whether it's working or not, whether it is actually you can say revealing a good results, and just periodically update the plan to account if any changes is required in the forecast or any other market conditions or not. So it would be better to monitor the plan whether it's working well or not, whether any changes is required in the forecasting plan or any other market conditions. And so this is the flow chart of the aggregate production planning process, where you can say put up the you can say 5 steps, and accordingly you can mark the question and just whether it's yes or no. So to determine the requirements for the plan, then the next step is to identify the alternatives options. Then the next process it's to you can say look up the planning process perspective plan for to the planning process. Then is the plan acceptable? So whatever the plan has been decided, the next next question that come up in the minds of the organizations, that is the plan acceptable or not. If it is acceptable, yes, then implement and update the plan. If it is no, then again you have to identify the alternative plans so that and need to check whether it align with the company vision or objectives or not. So once we just implement and update the plan, if the plan is acceptable, then move on the spreadsheets to check and monitor the plan whether it is working, whether the performance of the plan is actually good or not. So accordingly, once the plan according to the spreadsheets monitor the plan, then it works well, then absolutely it is acceptable by the organization. And if it's not, then again we have to follow up the first step to determine you can say requirements for the planning purpose or for the planning process or for the planning schedule that involves in a period of 6 to 18 months. So this is how the aggregate production planning process, which has been represented in the flow chart, that what are the 5 steps and what would be the questions come up in the mind, and accordingly if you say yes, then update the plan. If it's no, then again to identify the alternatives, alternatives or constraint or cost as well. So if something is lacking, then you have to begin with the second step, and again if it is already yes, then update the plan and move forward. Now the next concept is the aggregate planning process environment. So these are the factors which involves that the environment of the whole production process would goes well. So the first one is a medium term horizon. As I already explained, that it is a medium term scheduling which ranges a period of 18 from 3 to 18 months or 6 to 18 months as well. The next one is the demand and supply matching. The primary aim is to balance the fluctuations of the customer demand with the company capacity, because the environment is totally dependent upon two main variables, the customer demand and the company capacity, whether the company capacity is too enough to take up our decisions on the production rates, inventory levels, or the workforce size, etc. So this is something the environment would goes positive when the organization will maintain the balance between the customer demand and its company capacity. Next one is uncertainty. The environment is also characterized by uncertainties, because anytime the uncertainties arise, and accordingly the organization is always aims to forecast the demand based on such uncertainties. So wherever the necessities you can say occurs, a robust planning models will be used in advance. Next one is aggregation. It aggregates the individual products into the product families, because after all this planning is always applies to the you can say groups of products rather than the individual products. So that's the main aim of the APP environment, that it aggregates the individual products which turn into the product families to simplify the planning and provide the flexibility in dealing to forecast the uncertainties. Then second last is the cost minimization. A key objective is also to minimize the cost, which not only includes the production cost, inventory cost, holding cost, but also includes the hiring, firing, and back order costs. Next one is the organizational policy and the constraints. The aggregate planning process environment also includes the influence of the organizational policies, resource availability, and the broader goals like sustainability. Because after all, it is also equally important and responsibility of the organization to maintain the eco-friendly environment. Now we can come up to the common strategies used in the APP environment. So as if any sort of aggregate planning process environment has to be maintained, that, and of course they also need the common strategies as well. So these are the common 5 strategies which could be used to maintain the environment of the aggregate production process. The first one is a level strategy. It aims to maintain a constant production rate, and the workforce fluctuation in demand are met by build up or drawing down the inventory. So it's automatically depends that the demand would fluctuate according to the increase and decrease in the production, and that ultimately called the level strategy. Chas strategy is always try to adjust the production according with the demand. It could be done by hiring, or you can say firing the employees wherever it needs. Next one is a hybrid strategy. It combines the elements of both level and the Chas strategy. And the next strategy could be the back ordering strategy, where the particular organization accept the orders, fulfill them in a later period rather than at the present, which is also another option or another alternative to manage the demand when the capacity is limited in the organization. Then the last one is the outsourcing. So use the external manufacturers or the out contractors so that they can also handle some production of the organization. Now we can come up the next is manageable importance of the aggregate production plans. So aggregate production plans are the manageably important because they help to balance between the supply and demand so that the cost could be minimized. And of course, it also maximize the resource utilization and improve the customer demand and satisfaction. These are also called a medium-term scheduling, which always refers to a high-level view of production that always aligns with the company goals with short-term scheduling. So automatically it serves a bridge between the long-term strategic goals with the short-term scheduling of the production, which and through this it also ensures the better resource allocation, inventory control, and the workforce management. So what would be the importance? The first one is reduce the cost. So by aligning the production with the demand, the company can also avoid both excessive inventory cost and the expensive overtime cost, or due to the you can say rush orders cost. Next one is strategic alignment. The plan acts as a bridge between the long-term strategic decisions and the details of the short-term scheduling, because after all the main aim is to serve a bridge between the you can say long-term strategic goal with the short-term scheduling planning process. So it also ensures that the production is consistent with the overall business objectives. Next is the resource optimization. It also helps to maximize the utilization of available facilities, labor, equipment, which ultimately improves the efficiency of the workforce and reduces the waste. And the next one is the customer satisfaction. It also ensures the enough supply to meet up the demand, and it reduces the customer's wait time and improve the service level equally, which leads to a higher satisfaction. Next is a better inventory management. It also helps to forecast the raw material needs that allow a more accurate purchasing and reduce the stock keeping cost. Informed decision making. So by forecasting the demand and understanding the resource needs, manager can easily make a better decisions regarding the staffing, material procurement, and production levels. And then last one is the improved workforce stability. So a stable production plan is also leads to a more stable workforce. It reduces the need for constant layout or hiring, and then improve the employee morally and retention levels of the workforce. The next concept is a materials requirement planning, and in short we can also call it up the MRP. Material requirement planning is a computer based system which used in the manufacturing process that how the organization will manage and schedule the purchasing and the production of materials to meet up the production goals. It also works to break down a final product into the various components and then calculate what materials are needed at what quantities and how it should ensure that they are available without overstocking. And the key factors are always influence the MRP, that could be the production schedule, the bills of materials, inventory levels, and the lead times. History of MRP. In the early 20th century, this concept has roots in the early manufacturing models, including the Ford Whiteman Harris economic order quantity calculation has been done in 1930, and the Henry Ford mass production assembly times came up. Then next is in the 1960s, the principles of the MRP were formalized by the Joseph Orlicki at IBM and inspired by the Toyota production system. But in 1970s and 1980s, the adoption of the computerized technologies has been used in maintaining the material requirement planning process. So this leads to a development of the MRP second called manufacturing resource planning, which integrated into more business functions like finance, marketing, supply chain management, logistic and operation process. And the next is the later development of further evaluations has also been done according to the modern time by creating with the creation of enterprise resource planning, which called the ERP system, where most of the organizations follow this system in order to understand the all aspects of the enterprise operations. Next is importance of MRP. It improves the inventory management, to maintain the optimal stock levels by preventing both shortages and overstocking. The next one is enhanced the production control. It also enables the better scheduling, resource allocation through the computer-based systems. Next is increased efficiency. It streamlines the processes and improves the utilization of resources. Next is higher profitability. Is also the cost could be saved if the optimal inventory and the production systems is maintained. Next is customer satisfaction. It also helps to ensure a timely product delivery which meets the customer satisfaction. Next is what are the factors to be considered in MRP. The first one is the production schedule. So the master plan what products needs to be made and when. Next is bills of material, a list of raw materials, components, and you can see sub-assembles required to build a final product. Next is inventory records. What would be the current stock levels of all the raw materials and the components on hand. And the lead times, what are the lead time, because these are the factors which are considered in the material requirements planning process. So lead time, the time it takes to receive material after placing an order or to complete the production process. And the next is demand, both independent demand, it could be the customer orders for finished products, or dependent demand, demand for a component based on the production of a larger item, are crucial. And the last one is lot sizing, the method used to determine the quantity of the material in order to produce such product or final product at one time. That's called lot sizing. Now the next section is, what are the challenges of implementing the materials requirement planning? The first one is challenges data accuracy, that whether the MRP systems actually reveals the accurate data regarding the bills of management, inventories, demand forecast, etc. Because if inaccurate data you can say exist, then it leads to errors like overstocking or stock outs. Next one is the implementation cost. It is the initial step of the software, because before we apply into an organizations, because it always involves the systems integration, the staff training is also required, but after installing or after implementing, the organization has to think about the training process, about the hiring process. It could be inexpensive, or somehow it could be a barrier for some of the businesses. Next one is the system complexity. The system can be complex because in case of the larger operations, because the users might get struggle with the steep learning process or curve, because at some stage they could understand and another step they could not understand. Then if the second step is not understand, how the following and so on steps could be understandable by the workforce, and that's why it leads to a steep learning curve and maintaining the data integrity, which requires a significant effort by the workforce. Next is lead time uncertainty. Inaccurate estimates is also cause of production delays and excessive inventory in case of the lead timings. Next is rigidity. MRP assumes the fixed demand and the lead times, which somehow it make it difficult to adopt quickly when the sudden changes occurs in the demand and supply chain disruptions. Next is integrated issues. So without proper integration of the systems or the other systems like ERP, the data can be inconsistent, can be soiled, and leading to a misguided decisions. Now the next is MRP implementation strategies is always focus on data, the need clean and maintain data effectively, and use regular audit and automated or data collection, and systematic reviews is also being required to ensure accuracy level. Next one is the prioritized training and change management. It also provides a user training to help the staff to understand the system and adapt into a new processes. Next is integrate system. It fully integrate the MRP systems with the other business systems such as the ERP, enterprise resource planning, in order to ensure a seamless data flow and avoid duplication. Manage lead times. Work closely with the suppliers to maintain a realistic lead times, and consider the potential disruptions, and build a consistency plan for the material requirements planning. Next is refine forecasting. Use data analyst tools to improve demand forecasting accuracy and reduce the risk of under and over ordering. Next is commit to maintain, and it is very important to have a regular review and update the policies and parameters of the business systems or the software systems and MRP systems are not set in and forget it tools. They requires a continuous management to remain effective into a working environment. Next section is the core inputs and outputs of the MRP. The first one is a master production schedule, that's called MPS. It refers to a list of products that needs to be made when they need to be made, and how much or how many of each products are required. Next is bills of materials. It is a full list of the parts, components, raw materials that are needed to make a single product. Next is inventory records. It is all about the data regarding what in stock, what on order, and what is already used in the production. And using this input data, the MRP software that's called output is also creates a useful output that's called the planned order. Softwares always suggest what to buy and make and when. Order release, it also provides a signals to begin purchasing or production. Changes to orders, it also provides an update or the cancellation process based on the real-time needs. The software is also provides the reports that shows delays or missed targets. Exception reports, it also reveals the reports that point out the urgent problems like shortages or the late deliveries. Let's talk about the benefits of the MRP. The first one is it improves the production scheduling when a particular organization have a carefully plan the tasks. Next is keeps inventory level balanced. It could be balanced to decreasing the stock out and overstock levels. Next is increases the client satisfaction. It could be increased by delivering the goods more quickly and reliably. Next is it reduces the lead time. That time fixation, it could be a problematic, but it could reduce with timely materials ordering. Next is it improves the task planning, reduces the idle time, and of course increases the worker and the machine efficiency. Next is cost control benefits. The output, which called MRP software solutions, also reduces the expenses as well. It also such softwares and output could also avoid the excess stock and minimize the cost of carrying inventory. Next is if decreases the need for unforeseen frequently the more expensive purchases could also be minimized. Businesses can also use employees and equipment more effectively with the better planning, because after all better planning of course minimize the expensive purchases and of course maintain the budget under control, which always ensures or enhances the return on investment over time. The next one is demerits of MRP. It refers to a high implementation cost and complexity, because MRP is a computer-based system, so of course it could be an expensive and requires a significant investment of time and resources. Next is dependence on data accuracy. The system effectiveness is always depends on the accuracy of the data, and the data should be related to the inventory levels, demand forecast, because if the data is inaccurate, it leads to incorrect plans and significant problems. Next is potential inflexibility. MRP can be ridiculed or struggle to adapt to frequent or sudden changes in demand and production schedule. So sometimes the systems leads to a nervousness. Next is it may encourage the excess inventory. That's true. If the data becomes inconsistent or inaccurate, then of course instead of reducing the inventory, it increases the inventory level, and ultimately it also increases the costs. Last one is the limited scope. Traditional MRP systems focus mainly on materials planning, and it may not account to other constraints like machine capacity, because somehow the limitation is also addressed to more advanced systems like MRP second version. The next section is the restrictions of the material requirements planning as data inaccuracy. Data inaccuracy dependence is more into a computer based systems. Poor data consistency is also be one of the influencing factor which leads to a scheduling delay, wrong order quantities, or inefficient tracking. The next is capacity and scheduling. Infinite capacity assumption is to be adopted. So traditional MRP systems always assumes that they have an infinite production capacity, which result in ordering materials for production, but somehow that orders cannot be efficient, and the company cannot actually fulfill that orders. Limited flexibility. MRP assumes fixed lead times and production schedules, and of course it make it suitable to handle the unpredictable you can say time to make the changes or to adapt the changes in it. Next is limited lot sizing. The one of the restrictions of the MRP system is a limited lot capacity in order to determine the optimal lot sizes, which lead to a frequent replanning on the factory floor. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening this lecture. I will come up to a more interesting and important topics in the upcoming session. So till time, thank you and namaste to all.